All right, so I propose we start with a quick icebreaker. I'm gonna demo and then pass it on to the next person. So after you have completed it, please pass it on to the next one. And so the prompt, and I'm going to give us a minute to reflect so we can actually listen to each other, and we're not just trying to think of like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what am I going to say when it's my turn? But we can have a minute or two to think about it, and then we go. That way we also spend maybe give an extra minute for anyone else who wants to join in the meantime. So the prompt is essentially what makes a great organization great and what makes a terrible organization terrible. So I want us to think about one very, very short, like let's try to keep it to a sentence or two, like really micro story about something really good at work and something really bad. And so, for example, for me, I can think a great story of teamwork was actually when we were when the main team left, like a lot of the bosses left, and we could take over their office, and we're in this tiny space where we could spend a lot of time brainstorming and putting all kind of stuff in the walls and really thinking again from first principles. If we're going to reinvent this, how can we reinvent it? And having had a few years ago the occasion to do that, it was really, really powerful to help us rethink the organization as a sort of guerrilla internal team. And a story of how organizations have sucked for me. It was when I was in this DAO, and there was no community, as in like there were token holders, but the Discord was completely dead and it was only a core team working in private. And I was thinking about building community, and I told some of the people in the board, very excited after having put a little bit of work on this, hey, now we have a lot of community that is starting to pick up, and I've been putting a lot of energy into this. And then I received a message from the CMO saying, community is my domain. And that was it. So anyway, that's the prompt. So I invite you to think like that, a couple of one good, one bad short stories, and then we're going to be taking notes. So I'm going to give us maybe a minute and a half so we can think about it. If you already thought about it, you're welcome to stretch. I don't know how many hours you've been in front of the laptop, but I'm just starting my day, but it's there. And when the clock hits 12 past, we'll get going with one person at a time sharing their story, and then we can be taking notes in the Miro board in the meantime. All right, so let's get going. I'm gonna pass on to Peter, just because I have you first on the screen. Please pass after to the next person once you're done.
Sure thing. Well, first thing that immediately pops to mind is what makes an organization great is just the people. Feeling inspired after a session or a call or a meeting. When when the meeting on Zoom has ended and you actually feel inspired to continue the work instead of like, okay, it's done, we're good. Luckily for most of the calls, it is like that. So yeah, I personally feel really blessed in SingularityNET that most of the sessions are inspiring. And what makes an organization terrible? I don't have that much experience with that, luckily. Well, one thing that comes to mind is when I was volunteering for a secondhand store, like a thrift store. Over time, it became more and more apparent that all we were doing was not something for for the good cause or anything, but just sorting out the pension of the owner. And that was quite demotivating when that realization kicked in. Took about a year before I realized, but yeah, once that clicked, all motivation is gone, basically. Yep. Then I'll pass it on to next on the list for me, which would be Esther.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is a great question. Like Peter said, for me, people make or break the organization. So working with people who are generally supportive and well-intentioned and whose underlying motivations you know to be good, I think that really makes the organization. And by contrast, terrible organizations, well, luckily I haven't been in too many of them, but I do think that when it's fear-based, then when the leadership is fear-based and authoritarian, then it can be really bad. And having come from an academic environment, I do find that entire departments can become fear-based when they're ruled by the bureaucracy of the organization, ruled by the metrics that have been imposed by other people.
Judith, please go over.
What makes a great organization? I think a great organization is an organization where there's heart-centered and conscious leadership present. Excuse me. I think a good leader brings certainty to an environment where there's chaos. A good leader brings certainty to an environment where there's no certainty. I think an example of great leadership for me was Steve Jobs. When he would be in the boardroom, it's just a story I heard, I obviously didn't work with him, but when he was in a boardroom, he would always speak last because he would know that his employees would be so influenced. He had such big influence, and he would know that if he speaks first, then his employees would be influenced by what he said. And he always made sure to listen to his people first and then be the absolute last to speak. So for me, he's a great example of good leadership. Bad leadership then would be the opposite, obviously, leadership that's unconscious, leadership where people are dictating and bossing around. And I think the examples are plenty. I'm going to go with McDonald's, I'm going to go with Walmart. That's organizations that are promoting very unconscious practices. And yeah, I haven't met the leaders, but I think a great leader would also not necessarily promote these terrible practices. And who's next on the list? I'm going to go with Marta.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to my mind regarding the great organizations is I love this term holopticism, which it was developed regarding to a situation in which you see the entire organization and you are free to contribute relative to what you see. But you see, like it's working with small. So the best example for it is, for example, a small band. So you are playing in a jazz band, and you can contribute freely and creatively because you see what everybody is doing, you hear what everybody is doing, and you feel the music. And this is a situation where and of course people have to trust each other and value each other's skills and so on. But this is great, and moments like that at teams, I sometimes have those moments, but it's small teams that know each other very well, and this is brilliant. This is wonderful, and because people are not authorized formally, are not expected, but because they see what's happening, they are able to come in right on spot and do something. So this is wonderful when it's working. The opposite, what's horrible, what comes to mind is like those, like thousands and thousands and thousands of those middle layer managers in all those corporations that are so super frustrated because they have ideas and they would like things to be different, and they actually have much more energy then the organization is able to kind of consume, and basically a lot of friction in those structures, and like there's such a waste of energy, this creative type of energy, because they really want to do something, you know, and then and they are spending their energy battling for this ability. So this is worse for me. And I'll pass it to Teva.
Could you also repeat what was the term you used, the holoism or hopoism or something you mentioned?
Holopticism.
From my side, I think great organization, I don't know, it's a kind of a feeling that when you go into and it gives that good organization vibe. I'm not sure does any like story comes up in mind regarding, just maybe that you kind of feel that when the person who is onboarding or when you get into the organization, people have time for you and able to explain, and maybe even multiple times, and probably and thinking like person first instead of project first. Perhaps that gives a good organization vibe, but probably there are different styles of organizations that even that kind of approach may not be the right one. But for the bad one, well, one experience from when working in enterprise, like there was a systematic problem between different departments, and when you go to with a problem or to your manager, and then he says, go talk to him, and then you go to talk to another person, then he sends you, hey, this issue belongs to that place, and over like 4 or 5 times you get full back to your own manager, hey, this issue belongs to, and this kind of gives like a bad disorganizational feeling that, okay, something is very wrong, nobody wants to take responsibility, and just the problem is bouncing from one department to another and one personnel. Maybe that's an example of bad organization. I will give option to, I don't know, is Grace also doing this exercise? Or if you, yes, then to you.
So I'm noticing that like everybody's giving kind of enterprise examples, and I want to give a couple examples that are relevant to this group, which is DAO, which is the Genesis DAO, which was created by DAOstack. And the great thing about working there was everybody's super cool, and I think there were the right number of Zoom meetings a week. Like you got to actually talk through things, what's important to one another, and the prioritization of projects was done in these meetings. And the people were all smart, and there was a general caring about one another. And they didn't try to do everything by text on a Telegram group. Like there was the right balance of that. And so that made it great. And it was great to work there, work or whatever, do DAO stuff there. What made it not great, or bad in some ways, was that basically there was a pot of money, and it was between $5,000 and $15,000 monthly that the foundation would put into the organization. It wasn't a foundation, it was a company, would put into the DAO. But there were about 50 people in the DAO, and then you're kind of in this weird zero-sum game where you're actually competing for that amount of money, and that amount of money isn't really enough. It's definitely not enough for 50 people. It's not even clearly enough for 3 to 5 people to actually make a living on. And so what happened as a result wasn't really fighting or infighting. I mean, it was more like everybody was super nice, and everything happened super slow so that everybody would get like a little bit of it. And so you got a little, I might have been involved for 6 months, and I think I earned somewhere around $1,000. And it was kind of this being nice to each other. And we did pick good people for the things that they were good at, but it's not clear that, it was going anywhere, because it was all about like, oh, well, we kind of got to give everybody something instead of you kind of got to get something done. So that's an example from a DAO that I was involved in, and I will pass it on to Tommy.
Thank you for keeping me towards the end. It's early where I am, and I'm still infusing my drug of choice for the day. So if I'm a little foggy, I do apologize. Can everybody hear me okay? So I've been around for a while. They didn't have fax machines even when I started, if any of you know what a fax machine is, and some of the youngers I found out do not. And I've worked for some really awesome organizations, and I've worked for some okay organizations. I've worked in academia, I've worked in labs, I've worked in retail, I've worked in manufacturing, and as many of you know, I'm a farmer now, or I'm a retired farmer, so I turned the farm over to my son. The number one thing of the best organizations that I have worked for throughout all of my career on Wall Street, Maiden Lane, and New York City is the best organizations are fully capitalized. And capital or money is just a tool, it's energy. But when the bosses and the people don't have to worry about it, it takes a whole layer off of the collective. So I would say a principled organization whose managers or supervisors or whatever term you want to give them empower the people, and they are fully capitalized, fully funded, and they're not worrying about that. They are the best organizations. Okay, because then the leaders can do what they're there to do, is lead and empower. The worst, I don't want to say it's the worst organization, because I don't have bad thoughts. I don't retain them. But a humorous one, if anybody has ever seen Miracle on 34th Street, I worked right out of college. My first job was at Macy's Herald Square, which was Macy's 34th Street. And I was what was called a white flower. I had a white flower and all the people, and I worked in the fine woman's shoe department on the 4th floor. And all the employees who had been there for 20, 30 years had to come to me to sign off. And I didn't know diddly squat, but that was my job, so-called manager. So the shoe people were actually union, and I was not. And it was the holiday season, and the saleswomen were getting swamped, and they were saleswomen in the fine women's shoe department. And I attempted to help them. And I started selling shoes because that's how I was raised in this little bungalow colony when I worked with my mother and her aunts, her sisters, my aunts. You did what needed to be done. I got called up, and I had to go up that same elevator that you see Santa Claus going up to see Mr. Macy. I got called into his office because I had crossed the bounds of union and non-union, and I got literally, figuratively spanked by Mr. Macy. That was embarrassing. But I then understood the principles. Union did certain things, non-union did certain things, and he was just empowering it. I got a raise and a bonus after that. But in front of the union official, I was spanked. That was not good. So those are two sides to the coin. Fully capitalized, let the leaders lead and empower the people, and don't spank people in public.
Guillermo, please go for it, and then pass over to Vanny.
Okay, so hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for the stretching. And to make it short, I think people is the answer for both. And with that, let's start with good examples. So creative leadership. So I like my personal experiences when leaders talk in plural. They talk about us, and they don't talk about me. I say, I do, my. When we develop as a team, we develop differently. So so that means when a company or an organization have a solid vision and mission behind the purpose, it's something I repeat constantly. It makes things easier. A personal story, short, something that changed my life forever. I migrated to the United States when I was 30 for professional issues. And I have a great boss, not my first, but a great boss that once he saw me like 7 p.m. working on my desk, on my knees, 2 computers, he's like, what the fuck are you doing? Sorry for my French. This is not right. if you're here after 5 p.m., you're doing something wrong. I was covering somebody's else business. I was taking care of 3 things at a time. So he changed my life forever. Since that day, 5 p.m., I leave the office. And if not, I will do something better next day to make it happen. And that same boss did something great. That was investment in their people. He coached me, he teach me, he used to pick 5 or 7 personal members from different teams and invest in them. Education, coaching, in different areas of development. On top of the education we brought, or the knowledge we brought to the organization, he will push up the envelope and try to get us better. The same case, what makes an organization terrible, the same thing, people. I think that if you don't have, it's something that repeats in ourselves, good or bad leadership. If you don't have the right motivation, if it's not creative, it turns into be counterproductive. It gets people out of balance, and so that would be so intellectually honest. So there's a lot of great taglines for corporations. You know, you can see a lot of them. You know, they have great marketing, but that's not honest and true in a lot of organizations. So that I think the conclusion is yeah, when you work with the right purpose, you have good results.
Cool. Daniel, do you want to continue, or should we ask for one of the other people who hasn't shared? Vani, I think, hasn't shared.
Yeah, Vani, Vasu, if you'd like to share, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll be moving on. And to share your hand, there is a reactions button at the middle, and you can do like this.
I can just go really quickly. A lot of people have spoken about leadership, but for me, a good organization is one that focuses on leadership. So it's a focus on the work, not the badges or the levels or the status or who is the leader. And my second one is paying attention to and being aware of what each other is doing and what other people are good at and what they're into. So, you know, you're kind of giving respect to each other. The bad one is really simple. It's ego.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Are we missing anyone? I think we're good to go, no? All right. So we have talked about a series of examples of what makes things good and bad. And I wanted these to illustrate that these are all areas that we can be paying attention to. And that is fundamentally the question that the Supervisory Council is meant to address, is what should we pay attention to? What are the key areas that are really important for SingularityNET as it evolves as an organization for us to pay attention to? And so when we talk about a blueprint, what a blueprint is essentially a list of areas that we need to pay attention to, and that we need to come up with solutions, test these solutions, improve these solutions, and essentially keep evolving the answer that we have about those areas. So we mentioned leadership, we mentioned culture or ego, we mentioned things about transparency, et cetera, et cetera. So these will be all different areas that we would want to pay attention to. Now, as you can see, a lot of things relate to the interactions with the other people. Then there is the other perspective, which is the hard systems. So is like, what is it creating an organization, for example, where you have to go from department to department and is never no one's problem? What sort of systems, what sort of processes, what sort of organization design, what sort of division in between teams or setups, etc., create those sort of results? And that is fundamentally the question that we need to be asking ourselves is, let's think about all the different areas of an organization. Let's try to organize all of these different areas in some sort of list that more or less makes sense, because there is a lot of different areas. Organizations are very complex. So we're going to try to then group the different areas into categories. So it's a little bit easier to manage and to think about them. So let's say governance can be a category, and within governance, you can have the way you make proposals and the way you allocate funds and the way you budget, or maybe that shouldn't be the category and we can divide these into different categories. So it's quite an abstract exercise, but it's a very impactful exercise because ultimately what we define is what are we paying attention to? And so over the next 2-3 weeks, we're trying to address that question. What are we going to be paying attention to so that then we can figure out, okay, which of these areas should we launch experiments on? Which of these areas should we evolve? But at least first, we try to have this full list of areas. Now, obviously, the list can evolve over time, but in principle, I'm seeing this blueprint as a map. So it's a map of different countries, different jurisdictions, and we're trying to figure out what the jurisdictions are. And as you know from geopolitics, arguments about jurisdictions happen all the time. So this is a tricky topic. We want to get our lines between countries right. We want to create the right divisions so the countries can collaborate rather than fight each other. So for now, we already have, let me share screen for a second. So we have this draft of a blueprint. Please let me know if it's not on screen. It's the Google Doc that I'm sharing. So we have already this initial draft of the blueprint that is gone through a couple of iterations. And we could go, so we have things like membership definition. So how do we define who's part of the organization and who's not part of the organization? How do we define compensation, communication channels, governance, like a strategy and goal setting, decision-making processes? Now, maybe strategy and goal setting is not the right rubric. Does that even make sense? Or should these two be separated into things? Is the strategy the same thing as goal making, as goal setting? Or should we divide goal setting into two different areas? So that's kind of like the sort of somewhat abstract, but very, very impactful exercise that we're trying to do. So I'm going to move us to an exercise, unless anyone has any questions or comments, especially as well from the Supervisory Council and others who have been involved in this so far, anything that you'd like to add, or any questions or comments that you might have related to this concept of what a blueprint is. Yeah, I was struggling a bit because I was putting in the Mira and he was telling me that I can't for some reason. Yeah, cool. The link has been shared. So anyway, but I don't want us to go into the document just now. We can go there later on. But first, the thing with these documents is that they can feel very, very abstract. So I want us now, we talk about the past before, I want us to talk about the present. I want us to each think of us, how are we related to SingularityNET? Are we a contributor to one of the teams? Is our company or a project that we manage has received a few grants from the organization? Do we participate in governance? Do we not participate in governance? Do we have ideas that we like? Are leaders speaking last or are they speaking first? Would we want to change that? And so if we think about like our current situation, our current relationship with SingularityNET, and to drive a little bit let's say the case, the reason of why we should think about the thing, I want us all to go to the Miro board, take a Post-it. If anyone is not familiar with how to do that, please let me know so I can do a quick demo. But take a Post-it, and I'm going to give us a minute or two to reflect. How does the blueprint impact us and the evolution, and getting the blueprint right or getting the blueprint wrong? And are there any things that we think will be particularly impactful for us if we get right or if we get wrong? Let's say reputation. If this is wrong, it's going to be terrible for me because of that. Or the way we distribute grants, because actually I've been competing with this other team. Like personally, I had this bad situation where we spent loads of energy applying for a grant that we thought we had the best infrastructure for, but the community chose someone who had been in the community for longer. So if we can figure out a better grant distribution process, that's going to really positively impact my participation in SingularityNET, as an example. So anyway, I'm going to give us a minute or two. Please grab a Post-it and think about just very personally, how will getting the blueprint right or wrong, or any area in particular, what would be really impactful for you? And as we complete what we're doing, I would invite you then to use comments. You can press C and then click somewhere to drop a comment. So you press C in your keyboard and then you click on top of something else to ask clarifying questions. So read the different comments and let's figure out if we're understanding what other people are saying, if we really understand their motivations. Like there was, for example, one about decentralized teams. And I was like, okay, why are decentralized teams important for you? So let's try to dig a little bit deeper into each other ideas, into each other understanding of what would be important. So we can all increase a little bit our understanding of what each other is thinking about this. And of course, you can then reply to the comments as well. Yeah, I see someone using a box for comments. The comments you can, in the menu on the left, you can see them. I'm gonna share screen quickly to show you how you can use comments. So here in the menu of the left, you have these comments here, and then you can drop them. Or otherwise, from the keyboard, you can press C, and that also allows you to drop a comment. It's a little bit easier because it creates then a thread, and we can comment on the thread. So for example, here there is a comment by Grace, and I can reply to Grace and answer the question.
If you get the chance, perhaps lock the frames and borders.
Lock the back. Yep. Someone is clicking on it, so I cannot do it at the moment, but. Oh. Mm.
I think people answered a lot of, there's a lot of concerns there that aren't exactly what you asked for, but it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that maybe I'm going to bring us to some smaller groups, and then we can start to brainstorm in groups of 2. What would be key areas that would help us? And it can be related about what was personally important for you or not, but what should be some key areas for this blueprint to include, like some key areas that we need to pay attention to, key processes or systems or domains, etc. And of course, you're welcome to continue somewhat the conversations that you were having in Post-its. I'm gonna set up those break rooms soon, in a second, when I find the option again. Do we have, is this a paid account actually? Yeah, so should have the option, right? I just share another meeting room in the chat. Let us move there. So everyone, if we can leave this call, we might lose the recording, but well, at least we can have the breakout rooms. What I think is Google's Docs superpower, and the only reason I still use Google Docs, which is this thing that you should all be able to do, and please try it so you can confirm, which is suggestion mode. So you go here, and in the corner, you pick suggesting. And when you think something should be separated, let me find something. Okay, here is an example. So creating and changing rules and processes. So you say, okay, you know what? These two things should be separated. So you can come here and edit it. And it appears as a suggestion. So then the editors, aka us in the Supervisory Council group, can then say, you know what? And you can even explain your suggestion. These things, blah, 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 whatever. So that's the reason you're suggesting these. And then we can go and be like, oh yeah, you know what? That's a very good reason. Let me approve it. Or you're like, you know what? Disagree. And so it makes it really easy to collaborate on a document. So as you're discussing in the pairs, etc., if there is one specific area that draws your attention and something you like to suggest, we can go to that. Any questions or comments before we launch into the rooms?
Do you want us to emphasize the discussion or emphasize working on the document? Like, it seems like
the discussion.
People, yeah, okay, yeah, because we could all look at it later, but yeah, I'd like to use the breakout rooms to discuss.
Yeah, thanks for the clarifying question. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's go. Thank you for staying so much extra time. The document remains open. The conversation remains active. So we have our own private Telegram group for everyone who's not in it. I would suggest we can, if you want to continue discussing, there is the Discord DAO channel, and we can create a thread within it about the blueprint. You all have the document. This doesn't stop. We have another workshop next week that Grace will lead. I don't know how similar or not. That's for her to decide. But thank you, everyone, very much for participating. If there is anything you'd like to share, any closing comments, we have, well, we don't have, we could like go run over time an extra, and even longer by an extra 4 minutes. If there is anyone who would like to share about something from the last hour and a half, 2 hours. And if not, well, I'll wish everyone a very happy rest of the day.
And we're going to be looking for a lead project manager for the blueprint. We might do that from within the council or within the task force, but if anybody's interested, keep an eye out. We will be looking for people to help us with the blueprint, in addition to those who've applied for the task force.